Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of the Simsbury Planning Commission. Time is 7:01, and the date is May 28th, 2019. Like all those who can, to rise and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd also like to note that Simsbury Community Television is streaming this meeting live tonight. I think they'll also record it for posterity. So if you want to review it again at some other time, simsburytv.com or .org. Can't remember. Thank you, SCTV. Okay, next, roll call. When I call your name, please indicate whether you're here or not. Holly Bem.
Here.
David Blooming.
Present.
Aaron Levitt-Smith.
Here.
Craig McCormack. Here. Alan Needham.
Here.
William Rice. Here. Elizabeth Burt. So Elizabeth sent me an email today, so it's an excused absence. Richard Cortez.
Here.
Gary Lungarini, absent. Okay, so we have 6 regular members of the commission in attendance tonight. There's no need to promote an alternate to a full seat. Thanks for being here, Rich. Okay, next on the agenda, approval of the minutes from our May 14th meeting. Alan, if you could walk us through there, please.
We're going to have to insert a mention of the 3 commissioners that indicated they'd reviewed the record and were prepared to discuss the issue. So I'm not sure where you're going to have that.
So I would suggest line 38. After I introduce the application, if we could have some words to the effect, says Mr. Cortez, Mr. Blumey, and Mr. McCormack affirmed they reviewed the record pertaining to the application.
How's that?
Okay.
Okay, anything else on page 1? Moving to page 2.
On line 74, it said, Mr. Blumey questioned whether the 2 basins were collected. It was, rather than the word whether, it should be how the 2 basins were connected.
Anything else?
91,
Right, bottom.
it says, it's just the spelling of the word affects. Should be AFF. Pardon my English teacher.
Okay. Next page, starting with line 93.
On 93, probably it might be better to have used the word, rather than refused to answer, declined to answer might be a more appropriate. Doesn't make that much difference, but
No, I'd agree with that. Anything else?
164, missing the verb is viable. 3-story building is viable, so just add the word is.
And the last page.
Okay, I make a motion to accept the minutes of the May 14th, 2019 Simsbury Planning Commission meeting as amended.
Second?
You can call the roll.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, next, So we have we continued our public hearing on the application for 80 Climax Road at our last meeting. So we still have a public hearing that's open. Are there any members of the public who would like to make a statement? And if so, if you could come to the podium, state your name and your address before you make your comments. Please.
Is it possible for me to use the projector?
We're not, I don't think we're looking for adding testimony to the record, or,
Well, it is a public hearing.
That's fine, I got handouts.
Can I object to this? This goes way beyond the scope, I think, of the judge's remand order.
I'm just providing
I-
visual
I-
reference to my
excuse me.
conversation.
And as you know, as we talked about last week, the remand order required that we provide additional information to Mr. Shea in order to enable him to review whether or not our drainage system was approvable, was functional. That was the limited scope of this remand. And Mr. Shea has reviewed the additional information he requested and has now approved the drainage system. And so while you may have had discretion on this issue, if there had been a difference of opinion between Mr. Shea and Mr. Quirk, i.e., for example, if Mr. Shea had said, I've seen the additional information that you provided, but we don't think it was sufficient, you should have done more, and Mr. Quirk might have taken the position that what I gave you is enough, then you might have discretion. Or if Mr. Shea had said, for example, thank you for the information, it's just what I wanted, however, as a review of that information, I believe the drainage system will not function as advertised. And Mr. Quirk would of course have taken the opposite position. Then you would have discretion to choose who you believe. But this is, having a third party now inject new information into this, goes way beyond the scope of the judge's remand.
Bob, what do you
Let me
think?
read what the judge said. The two issues, the drainage issues, thus require a remand for the plaintiffs to have the opportunity to respond to the commission's stated concerns. That happened. The eighth issue is one in which Shea had sought more information, and the court has decided to exercise its discretion to remand on it as well. Accordingly, the appeal is sustained except for the three issues identified above. The matter is remanded back to the commission for plaintiffs to have the opportunity to respond to those issues and for further hearing and consideration by the commission. After a reasonable time for plaintiffs to respond to the reasons articulated by the commission and to the underlying comments made by Town Engineer Shea that were the apparent basis for those reasons, the commission will hold a hearing and make evidentiary findings on these issues, Commission retains discretion on these issues as to whether to grant or deny the application. The remand is limited to these three specific issues, however. And just to remind the commission, the issues are the 7th, 8th, and 9th reasons, all concern potentially substantial issues of public interest. So what the court did is remanded it back to the commission for the applicant to have an opportunity to respond to the three issues raised by the town engineer. The applicant has done that. Mr. Shea has offered his analysis of the response, but this is a public hearing. You retain your discretion. I'll read it again. The commission will hold hearing, make evidentiary findings on these issues. The commission retains discretion on these issues, not limited to giving the applicant's engineer an opportunity to submit a document. This is a hearing. You retain your discretion on these issues. It is up to you to decide whether or not, what I just got this as you did, whether or not whatever the member of the public is going to present to you has a
bearing or a material impact on the information you receive from the applicant and the response from Mr. Shea. Not having reviewed this, I have no idea whether it's pertinent, material, relevant. If it starts talking about traffic, clearly no. If it starts talking about the implications of what was presented to you, the commission, I believe, could find that relevant. Whether it's relevant doesn't mean it's material. But that's entirely up, this is a public hearing. This is not something more limited than that. And, you know, I understand council's objection to it, but, you know, I read the same decision he did, and I don't think you can have a public hearing without allowing the public to present whatever evidence the public believes to be pertinent. It's up to you to decide whether it is or not. It's up to you to decide whether it's relevant, and then the third thing is whether, yes, it's relevant, but it's not material. That's all up to you. And I've always counseled commissions in the abundance of caution, when in doubt, let it in, and then decide what to do with it after it's in. To exclude, I think, is the greater harm than to let it in and decide its impact. I say that without, you know, I just handed, I think you were here when everyone said, you know, this has got to come in a week beforehand, right?
I was working with my engineer who's on a lot of other stuff, and I basically just finished this at about 4 o'clock and got approval back about 4:30 today from him on the content.
Well, it runs the danger of running into the same issue that the court sent us back for here. It's a multi-page document. Mr. Wise just received it. His
No, I
engineer-
haven't.
Well, we'll give it back one.
I've never
We'll give it
received
to you, I'm sure, but here we go again. You've got to give the applicant, if you let it in, you've got to give the applicant to respond to it.
But, all right, this is a very special public hearing. I would totally agree with Bob if this were a normal public hearing, but this is not a normal public hearing. This is a public hearing being held because a judge has remanded it to you on 3 very specific issues that, or reasons, that you guys relied upon in making your decision when you did. And those reasons all were based upon Mr. Shea's opinion that more information was needed to determine whether or not the drainage system worked. Now you have that information. We've provided the additional information, you have it, and Mr. Shea has reviewed it, and he now says that information is enough for me to bless the drainage system. So I'm not sure what else could be submitted at this point that would be pertinent to the very, very narrow scope of this public hearing and your decision. If this information challenges the efficacy or the functionality of the drainage system, it's far too late for that. This only has to do with your reasons for denying this application, which were based upon Mr. Shea's memos.
So Attorney Wise, let me, I'm asking your opinion. Why would the judge have included a public hearing in his orders?
Oh, well, I'll tell you why. Because let's assume you would have discretion if there was, as I said before, let's say that the judge didn't know, obviously, what the outcome was going to be of this, the new information that we were to provide and Mr. Shea's reaction to it. But let's assume, for example, that we provided information and Mr. Shea said, well, I've reviewed your information and I don't think the drainage system will function. It won't function. You have discretion. You would have discretion because now you have conflicting expert opinions before you. And perhaps you would have, perhaps public comment on that conflict would be relevant. But that's not what's happened, as it turned
I
out.
believe that public comment.
So that's why I think that there is, based upon what finally did happen, where we have no conflict anymore, and you relied on Mr. Quirk's memos to you, that there's really no decision, that you don't really have any discretion left. That's my view of it, because of the narrow narrowness of the issue
don't
and what
either.
and the judge specifically, you know.
But if it's a public, I understand what you're saying, but it is a public hearing, and I'm not sure it's as narrow, I don't know.
Well,
We don't know
That's
what
my-
he's going to say.
Right,
Yeah.
that's the
that's
other,
my view.
yeah.
That's- I don't know if what he's going to say is pertinent or not. I haven't heard it, so
Yeah, I think we should allow it.
I do too.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the absence of being able to use the overhead projector, could you go ahead and distribute these? We'll determine if it's pertinent or not.
Thank you.
Please go up to the podium and state your name and address.
Thank you.
And please make sure that the applicant receives a copy as well. Thank you.
We can share. We're gonna make some copies. We're gonna make some copies, hold on.
Just we wouldn't be able to do it.
Apologies for not bringing enough copies. The
Can I ask a question before you get going, though, just for clarification? So, Bob, do you have a copy in front of you?
Mike's making a,
All right.
we want the
There- well,
applicant
there's-
to have two copies and he'll make.
My question would be just to, so there's a concern agenda, he's got 4 bullet points. Some of these, I'm thinking, aren't within this purview, so I just would be, I'd like you to weigh in on what of these we really can take up, so that you don't speak about something that we can't.
Are the pages numbered?
No, it's the second page, so here, do you want,
No.
Well, we'll
Okay.
just wait until Mike comes back and give the commissioners a moment to
Chance to read it.
look
Yeah.
at it. And
So what I could do is, on the consent agenda, I can go over the item with a kind of a bullet point of what it's going to cover, and we can determine then if that's a pertinent, relevant
well, I'd like,
aspect.
actually, I'd like to wait until our attorney has a copy.
Yeah,
And I want
exactly.
him to weigh in before you even get going,
Okay,
because if we can, I just would like him to take this and see what he thinks before.
That's perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a sign-in sheet? It's not on the podium.
Oh. I don't know.
Mike will do that when he comes.
Okay. You know what?
You can.
Some of us can prepare. There you go, thank you.
Each pen?
There's a little crayon up there.
Everyone has a copy?
Yep.
Okay, so please state your name and address.
My name is Paul Nosovich. My address is 78 Climax Road.
That's in Simsbury?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I think.
I've looked at the concern agenda. I can envision where the speaker could tie each of these topics back to the 3 stated reasons for which this public hearing is being held. I don't know if he'll do that or not, but I could see where it would be possible to do that. And I could see where those are issues the commission may want to hear, and after hearing it, you'll have to exercise your judgment of whether or not it's material to the issues in front of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the time tonight. Also, thank you for extending hearing and allowing the public to be heard on concerns related to the subdivision application. I want to go over 4 things today. They all are related to 7, 8, and 9. They're pretty much all intertwined into the basin and the drainage for the basin and how that's affected. So the 4 things are climate change, groundwater mounding, recharge or infiltration, and then the actual basin number 2, soil permeability, which is probably the most relevant of the topics. The others are tertiary that are related to that. So when we talk about climate change, that really comes down to one of the concerns that town engineer Shea proposed, which even in the last minutes of meeting, he still expressed concern over the possibility of spillover from the spillway on the basins. If we look at the climate change 100-year events, the original Connecticut Stormwater Quality Act paper of 2004 references TP 40, which is technical paper 40 by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for Hartford County. It was county-based at that time, in 1961 when that was published. And you can see the 1 to 100-year precipitation frequency events for that paper. Fast forward to 2015, the NOAA came out with their new Atlas Volume 10, Version 3, which updated the figures for the Northeast region. And we can see the updated figures in the table on the slide, which they've also added past 100-year events in that table as well. That is what I believe that Engineer Quirk actually used as his basis, according to his hydrography graphs. They reference the Simsbury IDF file, which that should reference. And that works out to, on the 100-year event, 8.52 inches in a 100-year event. That's an increase over 23% from the 1961 figures that were used. And just for note, in 2015, Connecticut actually did petition the federal government for additional funding to update their stormwater calculations for precipitation frequency events. So what we see is that number of 8.52 inches, if we look at the next slide, which has the bullet points, is the 24-hour precipitation. It has a 90% confidence interval between 6.29 inches and 12.4 inches, which means that in the observed practice of 100 years, the actual 90% of the time, the actual 100-year event will be between 6.29 and 12.4 inches.
Could I just have a point of order, please? Normally, when an expert gives expert opinions, they first describe their own expert credentials. Could you ask the witness, please, to state what his credentials are to be making a report like this?
So, Mr. Nosovich, are you an expert, and are you portraying an expert in this testimony?
I worked with an engineer on determining these things and getting confirmation on these.
Is the expert here?
He's not here. He can't make it. He could not make it tonight. If you do want to have the expert present, I could try and see if I can get him for the June 11th meeting, which would still be before the June 12th closing date, I believe, of the April 12th submittal.
The gentleman is presenting himself as a member of the public, giving information that he's compiled. It's not, and you're a resident of Simsbury.
Yes.
Where do you live again?
78 Climax Road in
Okay, so
Simsbury.
you're live right near here.
Yep.
Okay, so I think that goes to the weight you want to give it. I mean, Mr. Wise is absolutely correct. If you're going to give it the weight you would give an expert, like the two you've heard from, you would need to know the credentials and the background and the expertise. But as a member of the public, it's my view that he's entitled to present whatever he wants to present, especially since I think he's a budding neighbor to the property. And then you give it the weight you feel is necessary, having considered the point raised for the record that it sounds like the type of information that should be subject to scrutiny as any expert testimony would. But again, I think you decide what weight to give it in the absence of expert credentials presenting it.
Could
Don't
we
think-
ask the credentials of the expert who provided it, or whether that,
We don't even know the expert's name.
can we ask the
can ask him anything you
credentials of the
want.
person?
He's a
who
licensed civil engineer in Connecticut, and I would have to ask him to be able to provide his name to you, because he does work for
The absence
professional
of that
engineers.
is difficult to give it the weight you would give an expert report. You don't know who it is, you don't know his credentials, you don't know where he works, you don't know how many other such, all the information you would look to give it the weight you would afford an expert is absent here. But, again, as a member of the public, a budding property owner,
And these confidence intervals, by the way, all this is published on NOAA's website and with the IDF table, so nothing here is extrapolated. One thing it does note is it does note on the table that the maximum does not, has to fall underneath the probable maximum precipitation. So I did look up the probable maximum precipitation from HMR report number 51 by the U.S. Department of Commerce, dated June 1978, and that is in the 23 to 24-inch band. So 12.4 inches is under the maximum probable, according to that document. Again, take what you will. So one of the concerns is that water height to spillway elevation was given at the previous meeting. I would request that the applicant reiterate those numbers to the commission so they consider the margin of safety allowed against flooding Climax Road and neighboring properties in the interest of public safety now and in the future. I believe, from memory, one of those spillways only had a 2-inch leeway from the top of the water to the spillway top, which if you go beyond the confidence interval above 8.52 inches, that could be detrimental. The next section is groundwater mounding. So there is a concern with the basin design and the permeability of the basin, that water will get retained, and that there will be lateral infiltration to the southeastern property line of 76 Climax Road. This property has granted easement to 78 Climax Road as a right-of-way. There's approximately 100 feet of drive on access to 78 Climax Road that is at or below the spillway elevation. So there is concern that lateral infiltration may affect the existing basin, deteriorate the drive, in addition to risking flooding associated with that spillway, limiting access to the property, which could cause safety issues. This next part is recharge infiltration, and this really has to do with the amount of water that's actually calculated to flow into basins 1 and therefore basins 2 in the end as well, because basin 1 is hydraulically connected to basin 2 as the final drain point. The application is using 19 recharger systems, 1 per lot, to capture rainwater from the runoff of the roofs so that it doesn't feed into the basin system. States all roof leaders are to drain into the underground retention units with high level of overflow. Homeowners shall maintain underground retention units. The roof areas shown are approximately 1,485 square feet to drain into these recharger systems. That's calculated by 33 feet by 45 feet of the sample plan housing footprints on each of those lots. The recharge infiltration roof runoff over a 24-hour period is also put in these charts against the rainfall participation fall estimates of the NOAA Atlas 2015. And that's based on a roof area of 1,485 square feet multiplied by 144 gives us 213,840 square inches. That's math, don't need an engineering degree or credential for that, just need a high school diploma. And if we then look at that and we multiply the inch water for precipitation frequency for those 1 year through 200-year events, we actually get the amount of cubic feet of water that's required and will be coming off of that roof. So in a 1-year event, we could expect 2.63 inches of precipitation, which would be 325 cubic feet of water. If we go to the next page, which shows the Coltech 280 HD chamber storage, of which that or something similar was on the documents provided on the April 10th, received April 12th by the town. There wasn't any mention to the actual stone depth in those documents of the stone foundation below the recharger unit. Coltech does have a minimum 6-inch base, minimum 6 inches stone above, and minimum 12-inch side to side. I did include Coltech's spec sheet on the stone foundation depth and the effective chamber capacity per chamber unit. They did say on subdivision plan D1 that they are expecting 4 units per home proposed of those Coltech chargers. If we take the maximum of 18-inch stone foundation depth that Coltech provided in their data sheets, We can see that that's 76.59 cubic feet per chamber with storage area, stone storage, which comes out to 306 cubic feet. So the stone with the chamber will only hold 306 cubic feet of water, yet the 1-year event that would be falling on that roof at 2.63 inches will be 325 cubic feet, which would be more than the capacity of that. Obviously, there's some infiltration that would happen from the soil beneath, and also lateral infiltration. However, there's no testing that has been done to determine what that infiltration rate would be, and whether or not those can literally just be stone with a charger in the middle of basically something that doesn't drain at all. So that's just the 1-year number. If we go up to the 10-year event of 5.32 inches, we see 658 cubic feet of runoff. And based on that, we are running the risk, in my opinion, and also in the opinion of my engineer, that we could have overflow within those rechargers, which will now add to the additional groundwater that will then have to flow into Basin 1 or Basin 2 subsequently. Also, the other thing to note is that those rechargers are purview of the homeowners to maintain, and proper care and maintenance cannot be assumed when it's up to the homeowner. So the last thing really is soil permeability, and this is the big one that, there's no if then that, the recharger, yes, the recharger, if it overflows, it could end up in the system. How's that accounted for? Is it accounted for? There's no testing on the rechargers. Soil permeability is probably the easiest one of these. Soil tests 101 through 108 were sampled from the site on January 7th and tested by Independent Materials Testing Laboratories at Plainville, Connecticut, according to the documents provided by the applicant. The test reports provided in the memorandum dated April 10th and received April 12th excluded a result for test pit 101A. And there were 2 copies of those, and I did look through both copies, and I did not see 101A in either copy of those that were in the town offices. The memorandum also stated that the applicant maintains, the S is sick, that the appropriate design infiltration rates were selected for each portion of the stormwater management system. It is agreed that the infiltration rates used to calculate Basin 1, Test 105, and the dry well, Test 103, are appropriate for the respective portions of the stormwater management system. They quoted in their memorandum, received April 12th, that the town's review states that it is our professional judgment that the permeability rate of 0.155 feet per day, 50% of 0.31 feet per day for Test 103 is the appropriate rate for calculating the length of time until Basin 2 runs dry. I would like to point out again that the memorandum states that the applicant maintains that the appropriate design infiltration rates were selected for each portion of the stormwater management system. I would also like to say that from memory, and I don't know if anyone has it in their record, that the applicant also did state that the most conservative numbers were used in all cases. I draw your attention to sheet D3, which is the excerpt that shows the test pits on Basin 2. And this is the D3 sheet dated January 25th, 2019. Excuse me, the date is supposed to be date received on April 12th. What's highlighted there on the right, you can see the bottom of Basin 2 is the trapezoid on the right side of the image. There are 2 test pits located within that. One is Test Pit 101 and the other is Test Pit 101A. Test Pit 103 was marked as, in one of the documents, as being adjacent to the dry well and was the test pit that was used for the calculation of the drain time for the dry well. However, they also used Test Pit 103 for the drain rate of Basin 2 at the location shaded on the upper right. We can see that that's a significant difference from Test Pit 103. It's half the distance it's half the length of the basin. We also note that there are 2 test pits within the actual basin bottom that could be used for that calculation. It is my understanding and the feeling of my engineer as well that sample 101 or 101A or a combination of the 2 would be the appropriate samples to use for percolation rates of basin number 2. If we look at test pit number 101 soil permeability report on the next page from IMTL, we can see the 1.9 times 10 to the negative 5th centimeters per second. If we do the math, calculate that out, it turns out to 0.05 feet per day. If we look further into it, there wasn't a submittal for 101A in the memorandum. However, in subdivision plan sheet D3, dated January 25th, 2019, there is under 101A in the side elevation of the basin number 2, a reference to 144 to 167 inches red-brown fine silty loam, with the footnote there, 0.05 feet per day. And I believe that is the perk rate for that. Again, that wasn't provided in a separate document from IMTL. It is believed that basin number 2, the appropriate design infiltration rate, should be based on that of test pit 101. I asked town engineer Shea to consider that as well. Using the 50% clogging factor that was provided, that was used on all the other testing, this would equate to 0.025 feet per day. This is the same calculation that was actually used for basin number 1, which they used test 105 for. 105 had a slightly different rate of 1.6 times 10 to the negative fifth, so it was a slightly slower drain rate. But when you go to feet per day, pretty close to the same. The basin is said to have 0.465 feet of water to drain, which was the amount of water provided in the memorandum. At a rate of 0.025 feet per day, it will take 18.6 days to drain the basin. This signifies that the basin may retain water for much greater than 5 days stipulated in the Stormwater Quality Manual. As such, this design poses a threat to public health because it exceeds 5 days and there could be a mosquito infestation. Even if we take away the 50% clogging factor that was required by town engineer Shea, we still end up with 9.3 days to drain dry for that basin, which is still almost twice the number of days for the prevention of mosquito breeding. So there's concerns that, on that, there's concerns over that the rechargers can continue to add even more water than is actually expected if they overflow, and the probability of overflowing because there's not sufficient documentation on the recharger sizes or permeability around those areas, that's an unknown risk and not worth the safety and health of the public around. And I thank you for your time and consideration, and that's it.
Any questions?
Or the data to take in all at once.
Yeah, it's a little confusing to me why this hadn't been presented in the past 2 years.
Unfortunate.
And the
Living there 2 years ago.
the relevance of the data and your comments, we have to take into account the fact that you're not an expert. So, as our attorney has said, we need to weigh that in any decision we make as to whether to consider it or not.
Also, the issue of what the court has directed us to consider. Does this fall within that? What does this
I
have to
think
do
it goes
with?
to the effectiveness of the basin. The remand was, the 3 issues all relate to the effectiveness of the basins to handle water appropriately to avoid a health and safety risk. Again, goes to the weight, I don't think it goes to the relevance, although it may go to the relevance when you consider that it's not being offered by an expert.
Although many of these figures on which he based his assumptions are public.
Yes,
Yeah,
but-
this wasn't
I would just ask
secret expert.
Shea, if test pit 101, if he agrees that that should have been the test pit used for the infiltration rates for basin 2.
I think that question goes to the chairman. And I think the chairman decides, I think it's a very good idea to allow the applicant to be able to absorb and comment on this and make whatever argument he wants as to the admissibility or whether you should have heard it in the first place. So that gets in front of the judge on the remand, and the judge can make that decision ultimately. And then you may want to have Mr. Shea review it and say what he's gonna say about it, if he chooses to. He's not required to do it, but I think it's very, very important that the applicant be allowed the opportunity to respond,
If we accept it at all.
if he accepts it at all. Well, you now have,
Yeah, it's in the
now in
record.
the record.
Yeah.
What you may want to do is, before you make an ultimate decision about whether or not you will allow it as part of your deliberation, you may want to hear from the applicant and the engineer, and before you make an ultimate decision. You've heard what you've heard, but you hear a lot of things at public hearings that you consider to be not
Yep.
relevant, and this would fall into that category, I think.
So this is data,
It's information,
information that we could have examined by experts.
yes,
Tell
it's,
us what they think of the data.
it's not unlike if it were traffic, and the gentleman said, I live there, and it takes me 5.3 minutes to back out during the morning, and, I mean, it's that type of information. It has some indicia of reliability, given the stated sources of it, but again, someone's got to tie that together, and it's got to be subject to review by the applicant. And it sure would be nice to know who the engineer was that put this together.
Well, it's certainly pertinent, and we would be,
No, but,
we would be not living up to our statutory obligations to take into account public safety if we ignored evidence that could give us more information to base our decision on
Without
that.
knowing where the evidence came from, we have to determine its validity and its impact. So that's,
Well, we could
My
ask,
mind goes
we could
to
ask for
having-
input for that.
we can have the, is it appropriate to have the engineer look at this data and give us his 20 cents on it?
Absolutely.
And
No, it's-
the applicant too. I think that's the route to go.
We would be remiss if we did not do that.
The court has said these three issues rise to the level of public health and safety. That is a legitimate matter of your concern in weighing the test for 8-30G, the threat to public safety outweigh the need to. This court has stated that. Remanded it back to you on those three issues to take further evidence from the applicant's engineer, from your engineer, and from the public on those issues. So I think it's legitimately before you. What you've got to decide is, once you hear from everybody, whether or not it's rises to the level of materiality and relevance to the issue of public health and
But
safety.
what I'm concerned about is certainly, I'm sure the applicant is chomping at the bit to either say, give us time to look at this and rebut, okay? Or they're gonna say, we don't accept, that we need to reply to this. I'm not quite sure.
And
Does it
if the
matter?
applicant sees either one of those things,
Yeah.
it's valid for you to consider.
It matters only that we get to the bottom of this. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter
but what, okay.
the applicant
if we
decides
get-
to
if we
do
get-
about
If
it.
we get to a he said thing, we're nowhere.
Right. Which is
We've
what-
already heard from our experts, our town experts, okay? The applicant has had the opportunity to present the additional information the judge asked or instructed this commission to hear. Okay?
So all of a sudden, we have this new information.
Whether
That we
whether
don't
it's
know
right
what-
or not, we have no idea. There's
We
no,
don't know.
there's no basis
True.
that's been given to us as to the authenticity or accuracy of it.
So it strikes me that there would be, if there's time, sufficient time, it'd be appropriate for us to utilize resources to determine the authenticity and validity of it. I think that the member of the public that spoke mentioned that there may be an opportunity for the engineer who provided input to present or speak to their sources and opinions on this. So perhaps we should take the time to hear that as well as give other people an opportunity, to give us their read on this material and its validity.
I think that's true. I also think, in fairness to the applicant, you should consider a hard deadline for both submission of any additional information and a hard deadline for closing this public hearing, and some indication of the time frame for decision-making on the application. I mean, you said last time,
Yeah, we did.
anybody who wants to submit anything,
By May 20th.
May 20th.
I actually directed my comments to the commissioners.
Well, that's true, and, the public is not held to your admonition unless you.
Yeah, and to be honest, to drop this on us at this point in time, I feel we're being taken advantage of a little bit. So I'm going to ask the applicant, no, I'm not going to ask. I'm going to direct that you come up with a rebuttal or comments to this, and if you're prepared now,
You mentioned a minute ago that you might, or you were going to give the town engineer and our engineer an opportunity to review this and I suppose provide written responses, which is fine if we're gonna do that. But our engineer is chomping at the bit to give you a brief response, a brief rebuttal to what you just heard.
I think it'd be good, it's fresh on your mind, Mr. Quirk, and if you want to make some, I'll call them preliminary or initial comments, but the official comments will need to be in a written form.
That's fine.
And we'll have to review our dates, because if you want to have additional comments, I believe we need to leave the public hearing open,
Yes.
okay? If you are content with the comments you're going to make tonight, we may consider closing the public hearing. But I guess we want Jeff Shea to have the opportunity as well, so.
Per the judge's order, you're required to close this public hearing by, I think it's June 30. So you've got time at your next meeting, if you want to continue it to your next meeting, to hear from the town engineer and for additional written commentary from Mr. Quirk, which I think is a good idea, because remember, all this is going back in front of the judge, and he may benefit from something in writing as well.
Okay, so, please state your name.
Andrew Quirk, professional engineer and principal with Cratchit Jones and Associates, and engineer for the applicant. As you as well are just seeing this for the first time, so am I, but I do have some initial thoughts that maybe would give some direction as to whether this information is even received as even direction for the commission. As I reviewed this, a lot of these issues go back to a lot of the testimony from the last 2 years. We dealt with a lot of these issues at length with other professionals. So in particular, so much of this in that regard is not new. It was dealt with in different ways with all the different professionals and all the information that was handled, and some of it came in some of the other denial reasons that were overturned by the courts. So in particular with the climate change issue and the 100-year event, we spent extensive amount of time, as you may recall, in terms of what was the appropriate model to use between the rational method and the TR55 method, the storm events to use, all of that. And also there was Ed Lally,'s professional engineering opinion on that. And all of that was determined by the courts that the model that was used was appropriate. It was not brought back to this commission in terms of the model. It was brought back for soil testing, and then the subsequent analysis of the soil testing as it relates to draining the basin. So it was not the model or the storm events.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you saying this is contradicting that model, or that those are the only two models that can be used? Because I do remember extensive discussion about two different models. I don't know that this is saying that this is adhering to one or more of those models.
Well, without getting into the details of the modeling, I guess what I'm saying is that the modeling of the storm events has been decided. That's been determined. As we went through with the subsequent information that was provided, we were using the same model basis. That was decided, that was accepted by the courts, so that's
It's recommended by the
It's recommended by the town, and that part of the application has been decided.
I don't recall the testimony that said that those models specifically dealt with the climate change issues in the 100-year event.
Well, whether
I
they did or...
think those models were developed before recent findings on climate change. I mean, I think we were just,
They are using the current 100-year, and what I'm just saying is that the margin of error between.
We're not gonna retread the model that was
Yeah.
used.
yeah, I don't want, I'm not talking.
So
just-
what I want to do is just present that to you.
We took that
and
up ad nauseum, Holly, okay?
That's done.
So I guess my point there, and the commission can agree or disagree with me, but I believe that according to the court's decisions, that the issue of the model and the storm events that we are to use has been decided. And that was extensively reviewed, and I just bring to your attention again that Ed Lally, another professional, was involved with that opinion, and the courts decided on the modeling and the storm events to be used for this application. So that's been decided, in my opinion. Similarly, with the groundwater mounding, we had extensive information from our information as well as from the interveners with George Logan and the soil testing and the soil analysis that was done. And I just want to bring to the attention that when we talk about groundwater mounding here, specific to the basins, that the basins now is designed, the first basin has 1 inch of water and the second one has 5. That's the highest amount of water that's retained in the bottom of the basins. And so I believe the groundwater mounding, again, is beyond the scope of what was remanded back to the commission in terms of what the bottom portion of the basin and how quickly it's going to drain based on the soil testing that was done and then an analysis of how that would drain. This is a far different issue than the water that's retained in the bottom of the basin and how long that takes to drain. That's beyond the scope. Groundwater mounding is an extensive study. We do it for septic systems that are DEP permitted, where you look at large areas and look at the transfer of water over large areas. That's not the issue that was brought back to this commission. It was the water in the bottom of the basins and how long that drains down. The recharger infiltration, again, that's a part of another part of the stormwater system that was approved, and it was not part of it. I challenge to find where in 7, 8, and 9, the recharge system is part of what was sent back. And I would take comfort in that Ed Lally, again, brought up a lot of different opinions. We reviewed those, and there was a decision on those issues that's already been made. Soil permeability number 2, I think, is actually the clearest issue where there's been a decision that's been made. Yes, the soil testing was part of item 7 that was to be sent back, and we satisfied the soil testing. And then there was an analysis. And you have myself, the town engineer, there was a professional soil scientist, David Lord, that submitted test data, as well as the independent lab that all came up with the appropriate and conservative test results to use for each basin. So you have that professional opinion on what is the appropriate use of the soil test data to do the analysis. But I will address it that particular soil test data that's been brought up with 101 and 101A, there was the 101A is just an extension of 101. When they came to the end of the section of the piping to do the soil test, and we switched over to an adjacent section to do the extension of that test. That test was performed to be at a depth below the dry well that was in that area. And so that test is representative of the soils well below the dry well. The dry well has since been eliminated from the plan. This test falls almost 7 feet below the basin bottom. The DEP talks about analyzing the soils to 4 feet below. That test is not representative of the soil interaction at the surface for draining of the basin. And that's why it was not included as the conservative and best soil test to do the analysis by. And again, you have myself, you have the town engineer. I don't want to speak for him, but in his memos, he assessed what was the most conservative and best number to use.
So you didn't use, I'm sorry, so you didn't use 101 because it was 101A, thank you.
Which is, again, just an extension of
Extension,
101.
But that wasn't used because it didn't go down far enough. I mean,
It's
it
too
wasn't.
far.
Too deep.
Oh, it's too deep,
7
okay.
feet below the basin bottom.
Okay.
It would have been used when we had the drywall. In earlier memos, you'll see it referenced in
Yep.
terms of the design of the drywall. The drywall has since been eliminated. And so this is a test that's is almost 7 feet below the basin bottom and is not representative of the soil interaction with the
Thank
water.
you.
And that's why it's not used. And again, you have, I think, that comfort between all of us professionals that have already reviewed this and come up with that recommendation. So I present that as, whether this information should be included or how you use it is obviously at your discretion, but that's my opinion in terms of initially in reviewing this, its appropriateness to the application. And I think either the issues have been decided over the last 2 years, or in particular with the soil permeability, that the current memos have addressed this. I could take any questions or.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. Or some of the issues were actually rejected by you in your decision. So, for example, the modeling, and I'm not an engineer, but the town engineer had never questioned the model that Mr. Quirk used. And so I'm going to have it memorized, your 10 reasons for denying the application. But I don't think one of them had anything to do with the model that was used, because the model that was used is the one that is recommended in your, what is it, the highway manual? The highway manual, and that Mr. Quirk never questioned, because it is the town recommended model. So anything having to do with the modeling was not even a basis for your original denial. So this goes, many of these points, as Andrew has explained, go far beyond the narrow scope of the remand. And it is, I must say, sort of unprecedented. I've never seen somebody get up and read or try to summarize a report from an unknown and unknowable, apparently, expert who can't be questioned, who can't be cross-examined if I wanted to. You can't ask questions of them. Andrew can't respond. Well, he can respond to the summary, but he can't respond to the expert. And so it's very unusual. I mean, but you know my opinion on this, so.
Questions, commissioners?
Can we hear from Mr. Shea? Do we have any, I mean, I'm just wondering what his
Sure.
read on what was presented.
Jeff Shea, town engineer, town of Simsbury. I just want to make a few comments, and again, I would call them preliminary, because some of these comments go back to some very early design ideas that we haven't looked at in quite some time. In terms of climate change, and the resident of 78 Climax Road, I think what he was saying there really wasn't talking about the modeling. He was talking about the selection of the precipitation rate. And I'm comfortable that the model had included those newly increased rates of runoff in the model. So I don't think that's an issue. I didn't hear that the actual stormwater model was an issue.
No.
So, I just think maybe we missed the point on that one a little bit. He also mentioned the spillway relationship to the, what I would call head pool in the storm water basin. It is a very small amount of freeboard, so to speak, to the spillway, but that's how they are designed. They want to overtop at the spillway, and there is a sufficient freeboard around the basins, which is usually around 1 foot. So in that respect, I'm comfortable with that. I still, again, have concerns with overtopping, because the 100-year storm is, it does occur more often than it did in the past because of the type of storms. It's not an overriding factor. It's designed to do that. But, I just want to make a statement to that effect. In terms of groundwater mounting.
I'm sorry, but your concern about that is?
I just still have concerns about the temporary effects on Climax Road, what might occur, where those flows might go. Again, it's the discharge point, and I think I've made that point very clear throughout the last few years when I've given testimony on that. In terms of groundwater mounding, again, it's not an issue we really studied, or again, it was the first time we really heard it tonight. I think it needs a little bit more of a look. I think what the resident is saying, that There may be some breakout of groundwater at the private road to the east. It's something that we should maybe study and come up with render an opinion on. You know, on the surface, I don't think that's something that will occur. But again, it's worth a look. In terms of the recharge infiltration, again, I'd need to go back to see what the original design criteria was for that. These recharge infiltrators are really encouraged by the town to take clean water and introduce it into the groundwater as opposed to running off and creating more polluted water. So they also are outfitted with overflows. So when the actual recharge basin does fill up, there is a relief valve, so to speak, and that water would flow overland. So I'd like to take another look at that. Also would want to make the comment that not all of the recharge basins will flow towards 78 Climax Road. There is a kind of a ridge that's built into the design. I don't exactly know where that break line is, but you know, there is actually less water, surface runoff that runs off towards 78, less contributing area that runs towards 78 than would have done before the development. In terms of the permeability of basin number 2, we actually recommended the runoff rate. And again, I don't have all the information in front of me, but even though the report may not have been included in the supplemental memorandums, the graphic information was on the plan. So that's kind of what I used primarily to kind of base my decisions on. So maybe I need to go back and corroborate those numbers to the actual reports, but I think all of them are there with that one exception. And so those are my comments. You know, there's some interesting comments made. Too bad they came late, and too bad they weren't kind of presented by, you know, someone with more credential. I'll just say that.
So can you use the stuff submitted today, the numbers and things, without knowing where it came from, or can you verify that?
I can't verify tonight,
No, not now, but I mean,
but certainly I could look at it more closely.
okay.
Thank you.
Questions or?
Okay, so I think, Commissioners, I'd like to give both the applicant and the town engineer and any other town staff the opportunity to respond or make comments to the submitted, what are we going to call this?
Information.
Testimony? Yeah, the information presented tonight. So that means the public, you know, the public hearing would have to stay open because we'll have to receive their comments in the public hearing.
You may wish to consider a hard deadline for everybody as to submittals, new submittals, let's put it. I don't want to put Mr. Quirk or Jeff under a hard deadline to respond to what we're receiving, but
I do have somewhat of a concern that leaving the public hearing open, we could have someone else walk in with another set of information.
I think the commission's able to limit the reason it's open. You held a public hearing tonight. You've heard from everybody that came to the public hearing. Now you're kind of refining it down to, you know, leaving it open for the sole purpose to, you fill in the blank.
Mhm.
So that you don't get another
Yeah, there have
submittal.
been sufficient opportunities for people to submit
There's
information.
not been a lack of public hearings on this application.
Correct.
So, our next meeting is June 11, right?
Yep.
So we should pick a date, some days prior for submissions. What's reasonable? 5th, 6th, something like that? Is that reasonable, Mike?
5th sounds pretty reasonable, as long as I defer to the two.
That's a week.
Everyone.
Period.
It'll just be the responses to the information presented tonight. Yeah,
It's
the
just
town,
just
and the applicant.
Well, I also think that the individual, if the engineer were to wish to come forward and identify himself and identify his credentials, the individual resident, forget your name, should be given that opportunity as well.
Can we require? I mean,
No.
I have a hard time, so we can't require,
You can disallow it because it lacks your standard of,
because we don't really
Credibility?
know who did it.
you don't.
And I don't know where he works or she,
But
what the credentials are. I
that
mean, that
goes-
makes it a little harder for me to, I'm sorry, we know all their credentials, we listen to that. I mean, it's, not that I don't appreciate the information, but I find it a little uncomfortable to be taking, you can't go to court and not identify yourself when you testify.
No, but this,
So I just feel like, I mean,
You can still take the information from him for what it is.
I know, but we don't, true,
And Mr.
but,
Shea
Well,
can
maybe
look at
it's
the
not
numbers
gonna
and comment on
worth
the
much.
numbers. Numbers are the numbers,
I mean,
okay?
the sources of the information have been identified.
yes, some of those, that's right.
And you know you'd be in better shape if the engineer showed up.
But for me,
Or
that
they
goes
could-
to the weight you give it, not to whether or not the resident is entitled to get it.
Okay.
This individual had an opportunity 2 weeks ago to show up and do the, present this information and chose not to for one reason or another. And now he comes and he doesn't have the expert with him who can verify and who can testify as an expert. It's very unusual. And if he shows up next week, that's going to, or at the next meeting, this is going to go on and on. He had every opportunity in the for the last session and this session. And he's not an expert. And he's basically regurgitating, this isn't his information, he's regurgitating what purports to be expert information. And much of it goes well beyond, he's dredging up issues from the past. But I guess you know what it's, you can decide how much it's worth.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion that we maintain the public hearing as being open, but we're going to limit the scope to be the responses from the town engineer and the applicant to the information that was presented tonight. I'm not going to entertain the fact of your expert coming in next week or next meeting, that the opportunities have come and gone, okay? So,
You're not gonna, I'm
You're
sorry.
not going to allow the,
that's my
Author-
motion. My motion is,
And you do want to include the date for submission of
yeah,
responses?
I was going to get to that, okay? So, formal written responses to I guess to Mr. Glidden, right? Mike, you'll receive those by June 5th, which is Wednesday, only pertaining to the information that was presented by our resident tonight. Okay? You,
Have the intervener to be included in the ability to respond, because we are still a party to the action. Even though we haven't provided any additional testimony, we still have standing.
They're a party to they're as much as party as the town is, as the intervener is granted party status. The same limits.
Same limits, but I want to be included in the,
right, so the limits are responses to,
correct. You still want to be precluded.
you
He
wish
was
to exclude the possibility that the engineer could speak to this information.
That's Bill's motion.
that's my motion, yeah.
Could I just address the issue of this being an intervener? You denied, you allowed him to intervene, and then on the merits, you voted against the intervention under the environmental protection procedures. You found that there was no evidence to support. So he shouldn't be regarded as an intervener anymore. You denied.
We're a party in the action, though.
Under-
You can't say we're not a party in the action. The judge didn't say we're no longer a party.
It wasn't an
We're a
issue.
party.
All right, never mind. I'm gonna, he can participate.
We did deny.
You
but there's
denied
still-
As an intervener, but not, we're still a party to the action.
Mr. Case's clients were granted party status to the appeal.
But you didn't.
Oh, okay.
You should have made a motion to have me.
And argued the case in front of the court, and
Okay. So therefore, then they are. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
So I'm going to
Not on the
second.
intervention petition, that was denied.
Yep, okay,
and
but
that
I get what you-
denial was not
because they're a party,
appealed,
thank
But they're
you.
a party to the appeal, overall appeal.
Yep.
Okay, so let me restate my motion, okay? Tammy, you recording this? Okay, so I move that the public hearing remain open, at least until June 11th, at which time we will hear the responses from the applicant, the town, and the intervener relative to the information provided tonight by Mr. Nosovich. And the written responses by all parties to be delivered to Mr. Glidden no later than Wednesday, June 5th.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Did you, in that motion, deny the ability for this expert witness to be here to give test or to answer questions?
I think I inferred it in the fact that the written responses are from the applicant, the town, and the intervener.
I'd
So-
like to be able to have the ability of this person, whoever it is,
I
be
agree with
here.
Aaron. It's our duty. It is our duty to look at the safety issues, not to arbitrarily say, no, this expert's
It's
too
our
late.
duty to look at the issues that we were told to look at.
Well, these are relevant to those issues.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. We've had discussion. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
I'm
Nay,
opposed.
I'm opposed.
I'm opposed.
Okay, so we're 3-3.
Motion failed.
Motion fails. Okay, someone else has to try something else. Someone try
I
some-
move that we do just as you said with the motion, but we do not exclude the possibility of the engineer being here to give witness on it. Your motion, I like your motion except for that.
Could I offer a possible bridge between these two positions? Everyone else has a deadline to submit written documents. The commission could say that could apply to any statement of credentials, report, identity, whatever, same deadline. No new material, but
Okay, so I think what Attorney DiCrescenzo is saying is
Yeah,
that
I agree.
seeking to validate the, you know, the content of the document that was presented tonight, but not to give additional testimony.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
good
not
with
looking
that.
for additional
Okay, yeah.
testimony. I'm just looking
So
for.
we're really
identifying.
looking to say, you know, was this
Yeah, where did this come
person
from?
that Paul
Okay.
was working with, you know.
Like to
and-
understand who he is and what his credentials are. Validity, veracity of the information he presented.
And to the end that we would ultimately give some type of weighting to the document that was
to
presented
give
tonight.
you assistance in deciding what weight
What
to
was
give it.
correct.
Right.
Okay.
And his coming forward with a name, is that a letter he would write that I provided the information? Or would the resident simply tell us his name?
Well, typically, you know, it's, you don't have, engineers stamp things, and they provide resumes, and they provide cover letters summarizing their findings, and
Yeah, that's what we.
Yeah. this isn't stamped, there's no resume, there's no cover letter. I mean, if it's the lead scientist at NOAA that wrote this, that's one thing. If it's something short of that, that's another thing. And it seems to me that would be relevant for you to know in determining what weight to give it.
Correct.
Okay, I'm going to make another motion. I move that we keep the public hearing open to give the applicant, the town, and the intervener the opportunity to respond to the information that was presented tonight by a resident. Written responses due June 5th to Mike Glidden. The credentials of anyone that Mr. Nosovich was working with to be provided by June 5th as well to Mike. But we don't, in writing, but, no, not preferably, by that individual. You know, I don't want you to come up with a resume for this person and submit it. That person needs to provide the information themselves. Okay?
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, commissioners. Public hearing remains open. Okay. Back to the agenda. Okay, so under old business, we have the same application that we were just discussing under public hearing. There's no deliberation, so that item will not be taken up tonight.
Bob, can I ask you, so,
Sure.
and I asked this question only because this never has ended the way we thought it was gonna end. If for whatever reason, on the 11th, it gets postponed, we really only have one more postponement after that, because we have to make a decision by the 30th, right?
No, you have to close the public hearing by the 3rd.
Oh, but, okay,
And then you have 15 days after that.
okay,
So you're well within your time frame.
Okay.
3 more meeting times, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
two. We have two more
And
meetings, yeah.
then it's all over.
Okay, so under new business, I see from the agenda, no new applications, Mr. Glidden?
That's correct.
No referrals?
That is correct.
Any general commission business?
Nothing for this evening.
Can we ask a question about, did the, I don't know if I can ask this, but did the, the balloon test, McLean, did it ever go,
That's set for a public hearing this coming Monday.
oh, Monday, okay.
Remember, that's a zoning commission
Yeah,
application.
zoning, right, that's what I'm saying, but did it ever, back to, so Monday is the public
Monday
hearing?
night.
Okay.
Okay, say it.
I move we adjourn.
I second.
All in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously.
I had heroin this thing.